In regard to language, chapter 7 in the book of Daniel belongs to the first part. It is written in Aramaic. However, in regard to genre, it belongs to the second part. It contains an apocalyptic dream vision that is very symbolic. Welcome to another tidbit from the book of Daniel. We've come to chapter 7, and this chapter is in a sense the hinge of the book. It summarizes themes from the previous chapters. It introduces themes for the subsequent chapters. And it is exactly in this chapter that the role of Daniel changes, and he begins the chapter writing in third person, and he ends it in writing in first person. So the significance of this chapter justifies that I will have two presentations on Daniel 7. Nobody wants to listen to me for as long as half an hour, so I will split it up into two. This time we're looking primarily at the story of chapter 7 itself. And next time we will look a little more on the enemies, some of the thematic issues, and of course on the historical issues. So here we are. In chapter 7, Daniel is the one who now receives a dream vision, exactly using the same expressions as King Nebuchadnezzar received dream visions in the night in chapter 2. Daniel's role is changed. The way that human dominions and kingdoms is described is also changed. Now it's obvious that human kingdoms here are described as enemies of God. They are coming from the deep sea, which is a traditional enemy in all of Old Testament. They are also all predators, a lion, a bear, a panther, and an iron monster. And not only are they predators, that is, non-sacred beast, they are also all hybrids. And if you visit the Pergamum Museum in Berlin, you will see that similar glyphs or hybrids commonly were represented on the walls of the Ishtar Gate into Babylon. So the language of this chapter, even the vision, is within the culture of Mesopotamia in which Daniel lived and the culture to which he spoke. So, what is going on? 4 monsters, representatives of human dominions, arise from the sea, one worse than the other. But at the end of their periods, their seasons, a judgment scene is set up. It is not explicitly stated that it is in heaven, but that is somewhat to be taken for granted for 2 reasons. One, that this is a common way of presenting judgment and the throne of God in the Old Testament, part of the background. And then, of course, in chapter 4, judgment was pronounced on Nebuchadnezzar from a heavenly council, the watchers of the saints of heaven. So this judgment scene is now at the end of days. And the vision is structured in such a way that you have to distinguish between what we could call 2 types of judgment. There is a judgment that God has passed over the dominions in the course of human history, when one succeeded the other. Babylon was replaced by Medo-Persia by Greece, and so on. But this is now a legal, forensic setting in heaven. It's a heavenly judgment where God sits on his throne. And this judgment is described through a set of sequential events. Let me mention them to you. First, according to the explanation, and maybe I should add that the vision description finishes in verse 14, and then you have a conversation between an angel who explains the vision for Daniel, or heavenly being. He is not called an angel. And this explanation is then expanded. And this takes up half of the chapter. But the first that happens, according to verses 21 and 22 is that the Ancient of Days came. That is, the Ancient of Days was coming to his heavenly temple. Now, to the Greek mind, it is difficult to imagine God moving around, because he is, to that mindset, an impassible and immobile person. That's not how the Bible describes him. And the language of the coming of God to his temple is simply a way of speaking about the time when God takes over his kingdom. It is the judgment of the nations and deliverance of the saints. Psalms that describe the similar event you find in Psalm 50, verses 1 to 7, 96, verse 13, 98, verse 19. You find maybe a similar thing in Habakkuk 3, 1 to 7. And this is a motif that is reused here in Daniel. God is coming. That implies the judgment is set, to quote from chapter 7, verse 9. Next, you have an evaluation of all the human dominions. They're evaluated and they are rejected. Their fate has been determined throughout history by the heavenly watchers. This is then the final rejection. None of these systems of government is worthy for an everlasting kingdom. And then something unique happens. Into the scene steps what is called a Son of Man. And Son of Man is simply a name for a human. In this case, it is a human being as God intended him to be. And in the context of the vision, he is contrasted with the predators, the beasts of prey. He is weak. He is humble. He is a low one who is now elevated to become king forever. We believe as Christians this is Jesus Christ, the God who became a human, who lowered himself and then is elevated because of his humility to become king forever. The only one who's allowed to or is worthy to be king forever is the one who would never abuse his power. His name is Jesus. So God comes to judgment. All human dominions are evaluated. Next, the Son of Man is given the power to reign forever. And then noticed in verse 22 how it is stated that judgment is passed in favor of the saints. In other words, those who belong to Jesus Christ will receive the kingdom along with him. And finally, this judgment will be implemented from the perspective of the New Testament. Jesus will return and an everlasting kingdom will be established where, according to the text, the Son of Man will be worshipped. Now, a couple of notes on the text. In verses 13 and 14, you have this description: in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion then is described as an everlasting dominion. This was reading from the New International Version. You have 4 verbs in this sentence structure in 13 and the opening of 14. First, this is a participle used in Aramaic, which is part of the ongoing storytelling. This is what he saw. He saw the Son of Man coming on the clouds or with the clouds. In New Testament, this is used about the second coming of Christ. In Matthew 24 and in Revelation 1:8, This is the second coming. But the two next sentences are in perfect tense. They are past tense in relation to this second coming. So the translation would run smoothly like this, that one like a son of man was coming. He had come, he had been to the Ancient of Days, and he had been given dominion. This is a legal event happening before the second coming, and when Jesus returns, he will implement the decisions of the heavenly court. And among these decisions, these results would be all peoples, nations, and tongues shall serve him. This is future tense. This is what will happen in eternity. And in the last verse of the chapter, you have this expression in verses, second to last verse, I would say, you have this expression, and all rulers will worship him and obey him. The term used for worship, pelach, is throughout the Aramaic portions of the Bible consistently used to indicate the worship of a heavenly being. Some take the Son of Man to be identical with his people as a collective term. Some take them to be the saints, the heavenly beings in heaven. But the word pelach is used for the worship of a divine being, so the Son of Man is worthy of being worshipped and will be worshipped, just like Daniel has been worshipping in the previous chapter, has been worshipping God and God alone. So this is what happens. God comes for judgment. At the end of history, all human dominions will be evaluated, they will be assessed and rejected. They are not worthy on which to build a heavenly kingdom. Then the Son of Man, the only one who never abused his power, is deemed worthy to reign forever. And those who are one with him, who are represented by him, who trust in him as their heavenly representative, they will receive the kingdom. Jesus will come and he will be worshipped forever. Thank you for listening to this tidbit from Daniel 7. There are more issues to look at in Daniel 7. Of course, there's a historical fulfillment of the prophecy, and there are some themes that run through the book in the previous chapters and find the highlight in chapter 7, especially when it comes to worship and time for worship. Welcome back when we look at tidbits from Daniel 7 part 2.